Lyons. I'm the owner and managing director of Robin Lyons Associates. We are training, coaching business, specializing in the areas of leadership, sales, customer service excellence, and negotiation. This podcast is on sales, and specifically on how sales has evolved, how it's changed over the last few years. As a sales trainer and coach, I'm often asked that question. Today, I'm very, very privileged to be joined by Joe Housley. Joe is the managing director of a very, very dynamic and progressive specialist business-to-business video production company called Narce Media. I've known Joe for some time. I know Joe is particularly interested in sales because he has to champion the sales effort for his organization. And I know he's eager to learn as much as he can about selling as well. So nice to see you, Joe.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on, Robin. It's always a pleasure to see you, mate.
No, thank you very much, Joe. Nice to see you as well. And your business is really, really booming.
It is. It's been moving very, very quickly, a bit too quickly. No, it's all good problems to have. We've grown very, very quickly over the last 12 months, and sales is a key component of that. It's the lifeblood of any business.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like today we can have a little chat about how that's changed. I mean, I'm a few years younger than you, and
you are indeed.
Sales has evolved quite a lot over the years.
Yeah.
So let's. How do you think sales has changed?
Well, that's a really interesting point. It's a question, as I say, I get asked a lot. It has evolved, I think, because today the world is certainly different to what it was when I started off selling myself. We didn't have the technology, we didn't have the expectations today. Everything's quick, everything's very pacey. Customers demand answers very, very quickly indeed. Technology also has made customers a lot more sophisticated and savvy in the way that they buy. So when I started off sales training, we always used to say there are three key things that make a great seller. One is product knowledge, one is their selling skills, and the third one is their attitude and their mental focus and mental drive. I think what I'm seeing today is those things are still, I think, very relevant, but what is more important than product knowledge is customer knowledge. The best salespeople, I find, really take time to understand their customer. What I mean by that, they understand their business, they understand their marketplace, they understand the customer's decision-making process, they understand the challenges and the pain points within their customers. And I think the key thing is they have credibility because of that knowledge. The salespeople of old perhaps didn't need to have that knowledge. They could go in and they could perhaps sell confidently on their product knowledge. But these days, without customer insight, without market knowledge, the chances are you're not going to have much credibility. The other thing I find as well is that salespeople today need to be smart. Not necessarily smart in their appearance, because that's another thing I've seen, is that you rarely see sales guys in suits and ties today. It's a more casual, it's a more relaxed environment. And customers today don't want to be sold to. I think they want somebody to come along, to build a relationship, to build trust, to get under their skin and to offer them solutions that generally are going to add value to their business. So the best sales guys I find are very, very customer-centric. They put the customer at the focal point in their mind, as opposed to perhaps some of the egotistical sales guys of the past, where it was all about what can I do to get an order. So I think if you come across as the stereotypical cheesy sales guy, the chances are you're probably not going to last very long in that customer's experience.
I think there's a lot to be said for that, isn't there? That traditional sales person that you imagine, like a car salesperson, overly pushy. It doesn't seem to wash anymore, does it? Really, like you say, the amount of information that there is at people's fingertips with the kind of massive technological change that's happened has completely changed how buying decisions happen now. And but with that whole traditional view of a salesperson, what do you think? There's things that still are relevant today?
Well, it's a good question, Joe. I'm often asked, what are the tips and tricks that salespeople need to use? And I think, again, that language, again, sort of conjures up images of that manipulative, pushy salesperson who's influencing the customer to do something that the customer doesn't really want to do. I think the reality is we generally know when we're being sold to. And if we are being manipulated, two things will happen. We either will push back and feel that we're being manipulated, or we may buy, only to realize in hindsight that we've been sold something that perhaps isn't fit for purpose, or we've been oversold. Perhaps we're looking for a Ford Mondeo and the salesperson sells us a Rolls Royce because they're particularly persuasive. Of course, when we get the Rolls Royce, we realize that it's probably not exactly what we wanted, and we lose confidence in that particular salesperson. So I think, to me, the important things with salespeople is they have to be persuasive. They have to have that ability to inspire a customer to make changes. I also think salespeople need to have the ability to challenge customers, not in a pushy way, but in a way perhaps that can often disrupt their thinking. Because salespeople, I think, have to be evangelists. They have to have an ability to get customers to think a little bit differently. But in order to do that, they need to have knowledge and credibility, and they also need to have conviction in what they're selling. And to me, the best salespeople have real enthusiasm and conviction in their product and service. They really believe that it's going to actually work and make a difference to their customers, because at the end of the day, we want customers who are going to stay, who are going to give us referrals, who are going to actually develop business in the long term, not just in the short term.
And that's so that kind of nicely segues on into, I know we've discussed in the past the notion of the challenger sale, where, just kind of expand on my understanding, but, these people are, not pushy, but they go in with the notion that actually they're going to educate the prospect customer that they go and see, instead of, and the focal point is on the information and the insight that they can give to the customer, opposed to just the schmooze, if you may put it.
Well, absolutely. And I remember when the Challenger sale came out, which I think was about 6 or 7 years ago, in the Harvard Business Review, the front page was relationship selling is dead. And I remember one of my clients sent me the copy of the Harvard Business Review. And for a sales trainer like me, who'd been saying for many years, people by people build the relationship, it was a little bit like somebody telling me that the earth was flat. Everything that I believed in, everything that I'd been talking about was suddenly completely challenged. I think the reality with Challenger is a lot of people, I think, misinterpret Challenger, because Challenger to me is you need a good relationship, you need credibility in order to challenge. The Challenger book, I think, doesn't say relationship selling is dead. What I think it does say is just having a good relationship and building rapport with the customer isn't going to guarantee you business. You have to do more than that. You have to add value. And I always said as well, customers buy what they want. So as a sales guy or lady, you have to find out what they want. But the reality today is they don't know what they want. So you have to, I think, go in there and educate and inspire and give them ideas and insights. But you have to do that, I think, in a fairly subtle way, because as we said earlier, if you go in all guns blazing, telling a customer that the way they're currently operating is not the right way, that's quite sensitive. It's on par with telling somebody their baby is ugly. And whilst it might be true, it's generally not a terribly good thing to say. So to me, I think Challenger is challenge in a nice way, in a sensitive way, in a kind way. But if you believe you have something that's going to actually differentiate that customer and add value and make them better, then I think you have to have the courage of your convictions. I also think, Joe, you have to pick your battles, because not everybody wants to be challenged. And I think in order to challenge, you need to understand your customer, and you need to understand those customers who are willing and open-minded to innovation and ideas. What I tend to find is if you have a customer who's quite entrenched, quite focused on what they've always done, perhaps a little bit complacent, they don't always take nicely to a salesperson coming in and changing their view of the world. So I think you have to be adaptable, and you have to know your customers. And I've seen some salespeople really dramatically transform their sales with a challenger approach. I've also seen some salespeople who've fallen flat on their face by reading the challenger book, going in to see customers, and basically telling them that the world is flat when their view of the world is it's not flat. So it is interesting. There's not one size that fits all. So I still think relationship selling is important. I still think people buy from people that they trust. And if you haven't got a good relationship, it's very unlikely they're going to trust you, and it's very unlikely they're going to put faith in you. And
how do you think the way that technology has advanced and the analysis that businesses can do internally on themselves has affected how they appreciate value? So now there's, you can't go in and just have a nice relationship and say, okay, great, I really like you, Robin, I'm going to buy this because you've told me that it's valuable. There's a tangible pathway that they can go through to analyze and actually understand before the sale whether the value's there. And how much do you think that impacts?
Well, I think it impacts a lot. And I think if a client comes to you with a lead, which is great, very often what it tells you is that they are significantly through their buying journey. They've almost in a situation where they're evaluating options. So I think the reality is very often that they've already done their due diligence. They've already done an awful lot of investigation. They've already done quite a lot of spade work, if you like, to understand what's out there in the marketplace. So customers definitely are more sophisticated and more savvy. I think one of the challenges I find as well with a lot of salespeople is actually getting their foot in the door, because in the old days, you pick up the phone, you'd cold call, and I'm Robin, I've got some great ideas, like to come and talk to you. But these days, a lot of organizations find cold calling intrusive. Of course, with recent legislation, it's GDPR not easy.
And all that.
It's not easy to do that. So again, you have to be quite smart. You have to be quite, I think, versatile in how you approach customers. So I think there's still a place for the telephone, but increasingly today I see salespeople using social media. I see salespeople using networking opportunities, getting referrals. One of the ways that your business has grown, I know, is by doing great work. You get people talking about you. So to me, word of mouth, of course, is still the best way of advertising, and of course, social media helps you there. You raised an interesting question about value, and every organization will say, we offer value, we sell on value, we don't sell on price. And whenever I work with salespeople, I often ask them a question, and I say, what is value? And I get them to go around flip charts, and they brainstorm, and they put all sorts of things on those flip charts. I mean, if I were to ask you, Joe, what does value mean to you in terms of your customers? I don't know what you might say.
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a few ways. I mean, the very cold heart of it, the matter of business, for the most part, with private organizations, is making money. So, the kind of nature of the beast is the value equates very simply to capital. What return on investment can you give? And we're very adamant on, building a strategy around the videos that we're doing. So we don't just sell a video and say, okay, here's a video, it looks pretty. We say, okay, actually, we run subscriptions over the space of a year so we can understand the client in more detail. And then I think that has value as well. So we properly embed ourselves with the customer so we can understand their brand and ultimately create better content. So the value at the very bottom of the funnel when it comes out as capital is there, and I don't think that happens without those steps previously.
You're spot on. And when I do these workshops on value, people will often put things up such as we offer quality, we offer great after sales, we offer a great customer experience. We've got a strong brand.
I think those things do have value, but for when you're in a sales circumstance, especially when you're dealing with the like executive levels of business, that having that tangible return on investment is...
and you're right, and all of those things, dare I say it, can be quite fluffy.
Yeah.
And can also be met with the response of, well, so what? And the reality is, to be honest, when most organizations go and talk to their customers, they also generally say the same things. So no one's going to say, well, actually, our after sales are pretty awful. We don't look after our customers. We have a pretty naff brand. Most salespeople say the same thing. I have a couple of insights, though. I often say value is a mystery, and you have to solve the value mystery. What I mean by that is actually every customer has a different interpretation of value. And if your customer doesn't value your product or an element about your product, then it's not value. So my fundamental point to salespeople is when you go and talk to your customers, find out what value means to them. And that requires a lot of questioning. It requires a lot of listening. It requires a lot of drilling down, because very often when you ask that question, what does value mean to you? People often kind of not sure. They often kind of, oh gosh, I haven't really thought about that. But to me, getting to the heart of it is really understanding the value drivers. And you're absolutely right. I remember going to see a movie, which you probably have seen, called Jerry Maguire.
I can't say that I have. Maguire? No, tell me all about it.
I think it was one of Tom Cruise's earlier movies. But there was a particular mantra in that movie, which was "Show me the money, show me the money," and it's something that resonates with me, because whenever I talk to executives, it's always in my head, because you're right. A lot of the time, value is measured in hard commercial terms. So if your product or service doesn't actually help them to make money, to generate revenue, or to save money, to reduce costs, you've probably got a hard battle to convince that organization to embrace your product or service. That being said, we sell to people. We don't sell to businesses. One of the things that I often find with salespeople is they say, well, I'm selling to, let's say, IBM, but as if IBM is some kind of animal that has the ability to buy. Within IBM, there are human beings, and those human beings are the people that actually have to make those decisions. So my point is, whenever there are people involved, which is generally all the time, there will always be an element of emotion involved in the buying process. So not only do you have to show how your product can help your client generate revenue, which I guess is one of the things that you do, you can also demonstrate you can perhaps save them money, but there's also going to be an emotional impact as well. And to me, that emotional impact boils down to the chemistry, it boils down to the relationship, it boils down to how they feel about working with you, and it's more soft factors than hard factors. So I think whenever you sell, all of those elements are important. But as I say, you have to solve the value mystery, and you solve the value mystery by getting to know what your customer values. So whenever I go and see my customers, I am very eager to find out what they value. I'm eager to find out what sort of office environment they've got, what sort of cars do they have in the car park, what's the environment like, what kind of things do they wear, because to me that gives me an insight into what's their technology like. Are they using top of the range kit as you guys do, because that gives me an insight into what are the things that they're likely to value. Are they going to buy on value? Are they going to buy on price? And
say if it's you have your physical factors that you can go and you can analyze when you go in there, such as their cars and their clothes, as you've explained. What if you were going in there? I'm kind of need a little bit of insight myself. How would you navigate the questions and the conversation to try and understand that from a customer or a prospect.
That's really, really interesting. And it's quite interesting because I do find, dare I say it, you're part of the millennial generation, Joe. In fact, you're probably more Generation Z, I would imagine.
I'm right on the cusp.
A lot of the younger technology organizations I work with seem to be averse to actually going out and visiting prospects and clients. They're very happy to have webinars. They're happy to have telephone conference calls, Skype, and I get that, and I realize that, getting in the car and driving a long way to go and see a customer perhaps is not the most efficient way of spending your time. But nonetheless, I actually really believe the best way to understand a customer and get to know them is to actually go and visit them and see them on their turf. And to me, one of the things I always do is before I go and see them, I will generally write down a list of topics that I'm going to question them on. I do this fairly discreetly because what you don't want to do is you don't want it to come across as an interrogation.
Yeah.
And if the customer feels that he's on the receiving end of Jeremy Paxman, it's very unlikely that they're going to be engaged. So to me, the questions I generally ask, people love talking about themselves. They love talking about their business. So I generally will ask some fairly generic questions in terms of how they're finding things. Maybe I'll pick up something that I've seen on their website about a recent acquisition or a product launch, or maybe they've won an award. I think that's also very important, that you can find something fairly quickly to demonstrate that you're knowledgeable. And I'll then generally ask questions about perhaps their challenges and some of the issues that they're finding. I might frame it in a way that, Joe, we talk to a lot of progressive entrepreneurial companies like yourselves. We tend to find that one of the issues that they often have is new business development, because no matter how good they are technically, they are always looking for new business opportunities. I don't know if that's a challenge that you've encountered, or how you go about addressing that. So I'll often try and get them to open up about their business and how they're doing, and where they see opportunities perhaps to address challenges, or where they see opportunities to grow. Most businesses don't want to stand still.
Yeah. So
I think one of the key things is to ask questions and to really listen to the answers as well. I think the danger today of going in too prepared is that you're focusing on the next question. You're not always listening to their answers. And I remember doing some work with one of the big four accountancy firms, and they had a quotation, and it was, "Listen with the intent of understanding. Don't listen with the intent of responding." And there's a subtle difference there, because I think the best salespeople do listen, and the customer knows that they're being listened to as well, as opposed to being on the receiving end of some kind of process or methodology.
And that's there's almost that's the kind of cold hard of, if you were going in to sell to a new business, you might ask those kinds of questions. But I suppose that's also got value if you were dealing with your current accounts and you were trying to, even more so perhaps, if you were trying to actually upsell or cross-sell within an account that you're already present and working with.
And that's an interesting one, because in the old days, Joe, they would generally put salespeople into two different camps. They would describe some salespeople as hunters. A hunter is a new business person, so their focus is on getting the business in. And then there were farmers. Of course, farmers are relationship managers, account managers. So their job is to maintain the client and to obviously ensure that client renews. And I still see with some organizations, they have this distinction between business development people who are quite focused and quite hungry and quite, dare I say, quite pushy. And then you've got the account managers, the relationship managers, who are much perhaps softer and much more organized in terms of developing the relationship. I see some organizations who actually don't have a distinction. They bring the two together. I always have a view that your best farmers also need to be hunters. And I make that point because your best prospects, Joe, are your existing clients. Yes, you need to find new clients. But the people who are most likely to give you business in the future are people you already know, because you've proven yourself, they like you, they trust you. Most importantly, you've delivered for them. So they're going to use you again and again and again. And even if they move, they're probably going to take you with them. So the point I make, even as a relationship manager, you've always got to look for opportunities to grow. You've got to look for cross-selling, upselling, referral opportunities. And of course, the key thing is you want to maintain that customer's business as well. So you're right. I think that once you've built the relationship with the customer and you do understand them, you perhaps want to come to the party more with ideas and insights and things that are going to add value. So I think the important thing is, I always say this is another way that sales has evolved, because a few years ago, you could get away with, Joe, I'm going to be in your area next week, next Tuesday. I don't know what you're doing on Tuesday. Can I pop in and have a coffee with you? I'm not saying that approach doesn't work today, but I think it's unlikely that a key client would just see you and have a coffee with you. I think they'd probably say, well, look, I'd love to. Be really nice to catch up with you, but you know something, I'm really rammed next Tuesday. I've got lots of things on. So I'm not saying that we should never do that. You need to know your customer, but I'd much rather say, Joe, I'm going to be around in your neck of the woods next Tuesday. I'd really like to see you because I've got some ideas that I think are really going to have a big impact on your business. Have you got a free hour in your diary? I think the client's much more likely to say yes. Because you've got something that's going to help them rather than just popping in for a chat and a nice coffee and something that's a lot cozier. So I think people's time today is much more accountable. And in the old days, it was much more about schmoozing. It was much more about let's go out and have lunch, let's play golf, let's go to events. These days, I don't know what your experience is. People perhaps they may want to do those things, but generally they haven't got the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or it's politically unacceptable in their business. You know, if their company's under pressure to cut costs and everyone's accountable, somebody going out having a couple of days on a golf course might raise a few eyebrows.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe it's not as much fun as it used to be, but on the other hand, you have to. I think you need to add value, and that I think is key. As an account manager, you don't want to get complacent. You don't want to just rely on the fact that, well, we've got a good relationship, so you're gonna come back and do business with me.
And that you know, going in with ideas all kind of links back to that challenger sale approach and building that trusted advisor relationship, doesn't it? It
does, and I think you've got to be proactive. You've got to be innovative. You've got to take the lead. And again, I think salespeople historically have been almost somewhat submissive. They've put the customer in on a pedestal, and they've been rather accommodating. And I think today we've got to have a mindset that we're equals. This is a partnership, and we ultimately are in business to help each other. There's got to be something that's mutually rewarding for us. So I think the mindset today is, Joe, I've got some ideas for you. I think they potentially could really help you. Can we talk about them? And I think most people today, if you've got ideas, generally there's an appetite to want to listen to those ideas. But you have to deliver. If you say you've got an idea, the client's going to say, well, where is the idea?
Yeah.
So in other words, you can't. You can't. I was going to say BS.
Yeah.
You know what that means. I think the reality today is. Those kind of merchants get found out fairly quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. There's only so far the BS can take you, I suppose.
Well, some people would say it's taken me most of my career, but I would hope that my clients...
I'm sure that's not true, Robin. I'm sure that's not true.
I've been getting away with it for a long time now. Hopefully I jest, but there are a lot of salespeople, I think, who are lazy in their relationships. They've got the customer on board and they don't go with ideas. They feel that the important element of relationship building is visibility. And whilst that is important, it's not being there. It's what you do when you're there that's important.
So that kind of leads me on to a thought that I've just had about how do you think mindset affects or can impact a good salesperson in contrast to just a good skill set? So it's all well and good teaching people X, Y, Z skills, and this is a way you could structure something. But then that thing that gives them fire, or picks them up when they're down, that resilience. What's your take on those two?
It's a really good point, because you'll find in most organizations that if they've got a sales team, there'll be one or two people who are always consistently at the top of the tree. They're earning the big commissions. They're going on the president's clubs. They are the big hitters in their organizations. And inevitably, when you look at those big hitters, my experience is what makes them exceptionally good is marginal 1%. It's a little bit like the world of professional sport. Tennis, golf, the guys that make it are not 100% better than the journeyman. They're probably 1 or 2% better, and very often the bit that makes them better is the few inches between their ears. In other words, it's the mental side, and selling is challenging. You know that it is unpredictable. There is disappointment. There is rejection. So to be a successful salesperson, I think you need to have incredible self-belief. You need to be very resourceful. You need to be able to handle rejection without getting upset. You need to be willing to learn, I think. So you want to be confident without being arrogant. So I think what I find with the best salespeople is there's a degree of humility. So if they don't win a piece of business, they'll generally pick up the phone and say, look, Joe, we missed out. Could you tell us why? Because if we don't know, we're not going to improve. So to me, the mental side, the resilience, your generation generally get a hard time for being, what's the word?
Soft.
Snowflakes.
Snowflakes, yeah.
Soft, lacking fortitude. I'm not sure that's true, but I think the resilience element, the ability to kind of keep going, persistence, selling can also be quite lonely. A lot of sales guys today are they work from home, they work remotely, they're out on the road, so it can be quite a lonely job. It's particularly lonely when things are not going well. So even in a lot of organizations, of course, have big internal sales teams. So a lot of selling is done today internally using telephone, using email, using social media, webinar, that sort of thing. And if a sales guy is not performing, that will come across. So that there's an enormous attitudinal element, mindset element, which is key. I notice with the top athletes, the top professional sports people, they often have psychologists, as well as fitness coaches, as well as sports coaches. They have psychologists to work on the mental side. And there are times as a sales coach where I find that it's not a lack of talent, it's not a lack of skill, it's a lack of mental discipline. So there are some mental tools that we use to help salespeople to be successful, to overcome adversity, to maintain positivity, to maintain work ethic when things are not going so well. So I think there are elements that you can teach in that area.
There was something that you said that got me thinking a little bit, actually, in the younger generations, the millennials, the Generation Zs, and I think they do get a lot of flack. Mm-hmm. I feel
unfairly sometimes.
Yeah, I think somewhat unfairly, but I want to kind of just explore a point in possibly why. So those factors that we've discussed in mindset, and having that resilience and being able to pick yourself up when you're down and keep going and not have instant gratification. That's the kind of cornerstone of what I'm trying to say here. Is actually sales can be a long old trunch. You can be trying to sell to a business for, you might do one sale, it'll take you a month. You might do another, it'll take you a year or two.
Oh, absolutely.
And the younger generations, millennials and Generation Z in particular, that have been born into a world where technology gives you everything.
It's instant, isn't it? Immediate.
Yeah. You expect everything instantly.
You do.
And sales, especially business to business sales, it doesn't happen like that. It just doesn't. It
doesn't. Sometimes it's a long game that you have to play, and you can't make somebody buy. People often say to me, Robin, we want a course on closing, and I always find this quite bemusing, because it's as if there's some magical thing you can do at the end of the process to get that customer over the line. I think a lot of people feel that there must be some sort of trickery or some kind of hocus pocus hypnotism that will get that customer to buy. The reality is
there not? No.
If the customer, no, unfortunately,
no.
If the customer's not ready to buy, it's very, very difficult for you to push them. I think you need to try and understand why they're not ready, and are there particular obstacles from the customer side. I mean, there may well be things that you have no control over. There could be political issues. There could be just other things in that customer's world that are taking priority. So the key thing I would say is you have to you have to be persistent. You have to be optimistic. Absolutely. And you need to know sometimes where you can challenge and where you perhaps don't need to challenge. And I often say to sales directors, when a sales guy is having a bad quarter, the last thing you want to do is put pressure on that salesperson, because almost certainly they'll push the client away. But that gratification piece is interesting, and confidence is a huge factor, because if a sales guy loses their confidence, then that can have a devastating effect on their ability to perform. So again, with sales directors, sales managers, I spend a lot of time with them saying, look, when your salesperson is not performing, you need to support them, you need to coach them, you need to go out with them. What you don't want to be doing is giving them a hard time.
Breathing down their neck.
And cracking the whip and threatening them with a sack. That's generally not good for their motivation. So the mental discipline, I think, is key, and the ability to kind of keep going, because it's tough. You've been in sales, Joe, and every day you've got customers to see. The people I really feel for are people working in internal sales, in call centers, where they have limited or no opportunity to meet clients face to face. It's all over the phone. I feel for those people, because I feel that it's quite relentless, and they're expected to be on the phone virtually all day, and I find that can be quite repetitive, and ultimately a lot of these places have a high churn of people, because I think ultimately most people have got a shelf life in terms of how long they can endure that kind of environment.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. We've kind of spoken quite a bit about how sales has evolved to the modern day, but I'm curious to know, in your perspective, how do you think the future of sales looks? The technological advancement continues to happen, artificial intelligence, and there's some pretty interesting, fascinating, potentially terrifying things on the horizon. But how do you feel that continues to affect sales?
That's a question I do get asked. Are salespeople still going to be around? 5-10 years from now? Am I going to be running sales programs with my Zimmer frame? I don't know. I think there will always be a need, particularly at the bigger ticket end. If you're buying if you're buying office stationery, you don't need to see anybody. You can do that. You can buy that online. I think if you're buying a sophisticated computer system, if you're dealing with your accountants, if you're looking at something that's going to have a big impact in your business, I always think there's a need. People want that comfort. They want the relationship, that human touch. I also think that there are a lot of organizations, a bit like yours. You're not selling something that's off the shelf. You're selling something that's highly bespoke. You're selling something that's tailored and customized. So I think customers will always want to see somebody. They'll want to talk to a human being, and I do find that even with the millennial generation, one of the things that they say to me is that they hate calling an automated telephone call center. Yeah. They want to talk to they want to talk to a human being, or they want to, at the very least, they want to web chat. They want to have a dialogue. So I suspect in the future there will be less salespeople. I don't think companies will have. I mean, I worked with a company recently in the pharmaceutical world. They sell drugs to clinicians and doctors. And the chief executive of that company, this is a big, well-known company. He actually said in 10 years he believed that the sales team was probably going to be diminished by about a third. Wow. So which wasn't, again, that was quite worrying for a lot of the salespeople. But his view was in the future we're going to have less salespeople, but they are going to be much, much more sophisticated and probably more specialists in their particular market, because, as you say, your generation much more comfortable buying things. You mentioned a lot of your camera equipment you've got on Amazon, so that's the way people buy. But I think when it comes to dealing with, as I say, accountants, when it comes to dealing with big ticket things, people are going to want to deal with a human being. We some years ago we kind of invested in some online training. So we were doing online sales training, and we found that whilst it was potentially quite cool and there was interest, people actually found that the physical engagement was not very rewarding. And the feedback we got was that people want to be in a room. They actually they like this engagement. They like the face-to-face. They want to have a look at the whites of somebody's eyes. Which is good. So I do think salespeople have a future. Artificial intelligence, I think, is going to have an enormous impact, not just in selling, of course, but in everything. But I don't particularly want to go and speak to a robot. Even if that robot is quite good looking and sophisticated, I want to talk to somebody that I can level with, and I think there will always be a demand for that, as well as, of course, the demand for. I think people today just want one choice. Yeah,
it's embracing the. I suppose that will probably be what will make a successful future salesperson, is actually embracing the technology and understanding it, and not staying in the typical old traditional view of sales.
It's something
that's something that's happened already, hasn't it? But
it is. I do find a lot of salespeople are quite complacent. One of the questions I often ask them is, how many of you actually are using social media to help you to build your personal reputation, particularly LinkedIn? And I'm quite astonished today that probably about a quarter to a third of the salespeople I work with are not even on LinkedIn.
Wow.
And probably a lot of people that are on LinkedIn are not terribly active. They don't really see the value of LinkedIn. They see it more as a recruitment kind of tool. Whereas I think, again, the smart operators are active. They do see the value, and certainly my own business, without LinkedIn, my business would not have been anything like as well established as it is. I'm not an expert, but it's something, again, that I see a lot of people not using, and it's generally free, and being active on it. The other thing I notice, talking about technology, is I do see some organizations using old-fashioned direct mail as a way of trying to develop new opportunities.
It's somewhat of a novelty now.
It's a novelty.
Yeah. It's strange how things come around. Yeah.
It is, and I worked with a company recently. They'd had quite a lot of success with personal, very, very nice letters. They had a much higher conversion rate with letters than they had actually with an email campaign. And of course, as I say, with GDPR, you can't really canvass people in that way anymore. So you have to be a lot more subtle about the way you go about selling.
We myself and my business partner Connor, in our flat, we had you get your pizza flyers and all sorts that came through.
Yeah.
This is a great example of direct mail. So we're really of the generation where everything's digital, and I hadn't even considered the value in it. And we got this letter that came through. It just said webshite in capital letters on it, and it just straight away you looked at it and you're like, what? And it was a company called Plan B Creative. They're actually based in the Jewellery Quarter. So we're
Yeah.
So just by our offices, and they must have just done like a flyer drop at random into different apartments that were around the area and the buildings, just really on the off chance that it has some sort of impact. And it did. It worked. We contacted the guys. They had some breakfast briefings, and we've got a bit of a dialogue with one of the guys there. So
that's cool. That's a great example of just being creative and trying something.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think there's and the messaging was quite cool as well. I thought the website was a bit out there.
It's a bit out there, absolutely. I'm not sure I'd necessarily take that on board my own business. Some of my clients might dispute that. But you're right. I think a lot of it also, Joe, is you have to know your audience really as well. You have to know your customers, and to a certain extent, you have to tailor your approach to your customers. I think that's why the best salespeople to me are quite versatile. They're quite adaptable. They are chameleons.
Yeah.
They're able to, I think, judge their customers and evaluate them on a one-to-one basis, and to kind of be versatile in their approach. And I guess that's an element of emotional intelligence as well. And that's another area that I've seen salespeople be much more positive about. A few years ago, I don't think emotional intelligence was even around, but the ability, I think, to read people, to try and understand the kind of person that you're trying to influence, being self-aware as well. I used to work with a guy who is a tremendously successful chap. But he was known to be a bit Marmite. I don't know. You know what Marmite is?
I know. I think it's delicious.
Well, a lot of people don't think it's delicious. And he was one of these guys that was very black and white, and some people loved him, other people didn't. And I think the challenge today is, if you're a Marmite sales guy, you're going to win certain business, but you're also going to turn business off. So to me, it's having that level of adaptability. The other thing I thought I'd share is, I was reading some research recently, and the research was people make up their minds on whether they like you or want to do business with you, generally within the first 7 seconds of engagement. I don't know.
It's not a lot of time, that, is it?
It's not a lot of time.
You don't get a second chance to make a first impression.
You don't. So to me, I think, the first impression, having that credibility, thinking through how you're going to position yourself, what you're going to wear, how you're going to rock up, what you're going to say, is really, really important. Of course, increasingly today, the first impression people are going to have of you is your website.
Yeah.
Have a look at your LinkedIn profile. So to me, all that is part of the first impression. I was intrigued a couple of days ago. Donald Trump was in town, as you probably know. Didn't come to Birmingham, unfortunately. But and they were talking about the Trump handshake. I don't know whether you've ever seen the way he shakes hands. He's like a grinder. He's a bone shaker, and a lot of people shake hands in that way. I don't know how you adapt to that.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't like it. They feel it's a kind of power play. It's sort of, and one of the things I find again with salespeople today, they're not actually trained in how to shake hands. It's pretty basic.
Yeah.
Because if you're too much of a grinder, people are going to feel you're trying to make a statement. If, on the other hand, you're a kind of wet fish, you're not a wet fish, Joe. I don't think. That's
Thanks, Robin.
That also doesn't gel right either.
Yeah.
So to me, it's funny with first impressions. Little things can make an enormous difference.
Yeah.
So the first impression element's really, really key.
Yeah, I mean, that's the old saying, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Yeah, thanks. I don't know whether I've ever been given an assessment as to whether I'm a wet fish or not, but thanks for that one, Robin.
I'm sure you're not. Yeah. But again, it's basic things, isn't it? A lot of salespeople have never been trained into how to answer the phone.
Yeah.
You know? In fact, the phone is an interesting one, because I was working with a company a couple of weeks ago, and one of the sales guys was telling me he was having difficulty getting an appointment with a new client, a new prospect. And he said, Robin, I've sent about 23 emails. And I said to him, oh, well, that's interesting. You haven't had a single response. I said, well, maybe you've got to try a different approach. And I said, have you thought about picking the telephone up? And he looked at me as if I'd got two heads. He said, surely a telephone call is quite intrusive. I said, well, why don't you try it? They're either going to, block your call, or you may find you actually get through. And this particular organization now have what they call a power hour, where they do their telephone calls. That power hour is between 8:15 and 9:15, because they actually find if they make their calls early in the day, there's more opportunity to get hold of the decision maker, and of course less opportunity to get hold of the gatekeeper or the blocker, who's going to say, well, we don't take calls, all of that kind of thing. So it's pick up the phone, because what have you got to lose? So that's another thing I find today. People need that training in terms of, well, if I pick up the phone, what do I say? So that's I guess where I can sometimes help and give them a little bit of a platform to promote themselves.
Yeah, it's an old. It's not quite a face to face, but it's. I think it is much better. Hearing someone's voice, and it enables you to get a much better understanding of how they feel as well. I think, and also, if you're going to send 23 emails, you could send 2, call somebody, and then you'll know whether it's worth pursuing or not a lot sooner, instead of the time that you'd spend sending your other 20 odd emails.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things I've started to do, because I work with a lot of tech companies, is I've started to use video conferencing a lot more than obviously I ever used to. And I find video conferencing can be quite useful, particularly I've got one client, and they've got people in all over the world. So obviously the idea of getting people together is just not good. And what I like with the video conferencing is as opposed to a phone call, of course, you can see them, and you can build a little bit of rapport, and it's a more intimate environment. So I do find that can be quite useful as well. Just to add to your repertoire, there are a lot of different VC tools around today that invariably, of course, with some of these tools, you get yourself geared up for the Skype call, and then for whatever reason the connection's not good, and you end up just having a phone call anyway. But certainly that, I think, helps as a tool to develop relationships where geography is a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Robin, if you were going to give, your key things in what makes a good salesperson, just as a kind of like final hurrah to me, some takeaways, what would you go with?
Okay. If I can put them in priority, I would say attitude. Attitude all the way. You need to enjoy selling. You need to enjoy people. You need to be incredibly focused. You need to be incredibly positive and passionate, and you need to have a very strong work ethic as well. Today, selling is not a job; it's a vocation. It's a lifestyle. You need to have that attitude as you have. That this is my business. So attitude is key. I think find an environment that you're excited about. It's very, very difficult to sell something that you're not enthusiastic about. We've seen elements of that recently with Brexit. Don't want to be political, but it's quite difficult to sell something that your heart's not completely in. So conviction and belief, know your customer, research them, find out about them, know the customer as well as the customer knows themselves. Find out what their challenges, goals are, find out what they see as value as well. Don't tell them things they already know. Don't waste the time. Make sure that when you visit them, that you have things that add value and that make a difference. Be persistent, be resilient, be dedicated. Absolutely. Be an incredibly good listener. Have humility. People don't want a cocky, arrogant, full of themselves salesperson. The best salespeople I find are authentic. They have integrity. They sell things that will make a difference, and they don't sell things that don't make a difference. Be your customer's advocate in your own organization. You are your customer's voice. So sometimes you have to challenge your own organization. You have to go to your boss and say, look, this is what my customer wants. Unless we give them what they want, they're not going to buy from us. So I think the ability to challenge your own organization is key. Finally, be a team player. The best sales guys, I think, are highly collaborative. They build partnerships with the client, but they also build partnerships internally as well, because today, the best sales guys, it's not about them, it's about bringing in the right team. Your company, Joe, is a team effort. Mm-hmm. And, you've got to get the whole team behind the client. So you need to almost treat your own organization as a customer as well. And be able to bring in the right people. And the final point I will make is one of the other things that I've noticed in sales in terms of the evolution is that a few years ago, generally the sales guy was the main person that the client would see. So everything passed through the sales guy. The trouble is, if the sales guy left or got ill, or was fired, there was no relationship. So what I see now is we actually call it zipping the client. I don't know whether you're
I've heard of zipping the client, yeah.
So zipping basically is like a zip that you bring in, your senior person, your MD is talking to their MD. Your pre-sales person is talking to their technical guru. Your sales guy is talking to their project owner. Your legal people are talking to their legal people. Your FD is talking to their FD. So we talk about actually team selling and a collaborative approach. And the great thing with team selling, this is a partnership. And even if a sales guy leaves, or even if the customer leaves, the relationship's sticky. Yeah. And I have one particular client who said to me, Robin, we've embraced your zipping approach, and it's been a real game changer for our business. In that we now, once we get a client, we don't lose them because we're all over them. So obviously that works for bigger organizations where they have the resources to be able to come in. But the collaborative approach, I think, is quite key.
So much to take away. So many lessons today, Robin. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Well, you guys are obviously doing a lot of things right. Your business is growing, so intuitively you must be doing a lot of these things. And you're excited and enthusiastic about your business. That's one of the things I notice. Is this isn't a business, it's what you do, it's your passion, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And your excitement and enthusiasm is hugely contagious. So, and to me, that's another thing as well. That's key is be enthusiastic, and if you believe you're the best, tell people you're the best.
Absolutely, good stuff, man.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you for it so much. So we get that. What was it? A wet fish.
Wet fish.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
Okay.
Cheers.
Pleasure, Joe. Thank you very much.